NetWave, or Networks Against Violent Extremism, is a program for early prevention of violence which has been inspired or motivated by radical political religious ideas, in particular Islamist ideologies. NetWave is based on the Netwas, or Networks Against School Shootings program, which has been developed by Berlin Free University between 2009 and 2013. The NetWAS program was implemented by 88 schools across Germany. An evaluation study carried out with the schools that implemented the NetWAS program between October 2010 and January 2012 has confirmed the program's effectiveness as a comprehensive instrument that can prevent severe targeted violence in schools. The NetWave program introduces a prevention structure to assess cases of potential radicalization inspired by Islamist ideas, which can be integrated into schools' internal organizational structures. The program is located between secondary or selective and tertiary or indicated prevention interventions, and it assumes that some students run a higher risk of being dragged into processes of radicalization due to their specific vulnerabilities, such as individual dispositions or adverse social and environmental factors. The NetWave program has basically 6 objectives. The first objective is school personnel's knowledge on both the specific phenomenon of processes of violent and non-violent radicalization inspired by political religious ideologies, as well as the general crisis young people might experience in their adolescence, which in turn can ultimately lead to violent extremism. The second objective is to sensitize school personnel for attitudes and mindsets that serve to legitimize violence. The third objective is to increase school personnel's skills and self-certainty in 3 dimensions: early detection of potential cases of radicalization among their students, assessing risks and needs of such cases, and drawing up low-threshold interventions to support students individually. The fourth objective is to promote tolerance and plurality of values in schools. The fifth objective is to demystify prejudices about the roots and logics of radicalization in general and Islamist radicalization in particular. And the sixth objective is to build a cooperative professional network both inside schools and between schools and other stakeholders for more effective radicalization prevention work. So for that purpose, the program creates a series of positions and committees for case assessment and management, detailed procedures for how these offices should operate, and a logical scheme for behavioral risk and threat assessment, as well as needs assessment of individual cases. And as it is a prerequisite for any prevention work against radicalization to have certain knowledge about this phenomenon, the NetWave program also includes a 2-day training component, where, for instance, school personnel will be introduced to the structures, procedures, and assessment schemes of the program and acquire detailed and scientifically grounded knowledge about the sequences of radicalization processes inspired by Islamist ideas and their psychological contexts, about the linkages of such processes of psychosocial crisis and social, environmental, and developmental factors, and about signs and behaviors which might indicate imminent On this slide you can see the 3 positions and committees the NetWave program proposes to integrate into a school's internal structure. So there's the crisis prevention focal point, a crisis prevention team, and a process observer. Moreover, the program provides for a detailed procedure to tackle potential or already ongoing radicalization processes, which consists of a 4-step logic, which you can see on the right-hand side of the slide, and which I will explain in detail in the next section. Just one important note before we move on to the details of the NetWave procedure. The program seeks to complement, but does not want to replace other mechanisms inside school to deal with radicalization cases, such as pedagogic interventions, crisis plans and emergency protocols, legal provisions, and guidelines and directives elaborated specifically for such phenomena. NetWave's four-step logic sets off: once signs and behaviors have been observed by school personnel that indicate a student is trapped in a psychosocial crisis, or that suggest there's a process of radicalization ongoing in the student, or if there was a concrete incident that disrupted peace at school. The first step in NetWave's prevention procedure is basically a call upon all school personnel, teachers, social workers, psychologists, secretaries, janitors, and other people to generally maintain an attentive attitude towards their students. People are asked to observe pupils mindfully and sensitively and keep awareness high of possible hints regarding a psychosocial crisis. In case school personnel makes any striking observation, all people are required to do basically two things. First, collect complete information on the observation they have made, that is, who, when, what, why, where, and document that information in written immediately after collection. And two, pass any relevant information on to the crisis prevention focal point. At that point in time, it is highly important that staff trust in their gut feeling, be it good or bad, when weighing if what they have observed is something that requires further action or not. In the second step of NetWave's procedure, the crisis prevention focal point, which could be the school's headmaster, a social worker, a counselor, a psychologist, or any person the school might choose, is then asked to receive all information about the student in question that is getting to him or to her on that specific case, consolidate that information, and gather additional information, including background information about the individual situation of the student, for instance about his or her family, physical or mental health, about friends within and outside school, about spare time activities, and about his or her situation in school. This is important for two reasons. In some cases, a psychosocial crisis becomes visible only if you look at the complete picture, and at the same time, this also serves to avoid information loss and fragmentation. Plus, it improves the diffusion of information to other people that are relevant for any further prevention interventions. The crisis prevention focal point is then asked to start to assess the information gathered, focusing exclusively on the facts, and if he or she deems it necessary, pass that information on to the crisis prevention team and call a team meeting if he or she assesses that the student is trapped in a persistent psychosocial crisis which can't be solved with existing pedagogic or educational interventions and requires interventions from more stakeholders. The third step in the NetWave procedure basically refers to the work of the crisis prevention team, which is the central body of the NetWave program. The crisis prevention team is in charge of assessing individual cases from an inside school perspective by putting all isolated observations and information into context. The team is essentially made up of the school's headmaster or delegate, the counselor teacher, the crisis prevention focal point, the social worker, and the classroom teacher of the student in question. However, according to the specific circumstances of each case, the circle of team members can be flexibly broadened to any other people relevant for individual case assessment. For instance, school psychologists, representatives from youth welfare offices, the police, employees of psychosocial counseling centers, or members of sports clubs or local associations. Once a crisis prevention team meeting has been called, the team is required to collectively analyze the information gathered based on the aforementioned set of indicators, that is, crisis symptoms, individual and social strain factors, and resources or protectors. In the next step, the team should then move on to assess the information gathered in a standardized and structured procedure. Afterwards, it should discuss the information, determine potential risks of the case, initiate supporting measures, determine who's responsible to implement those supporting measures, and appoint a process observer who's in charge of monitoring the case itself and any progress in the implementation of the supporting measures. At this stage of the process, the parents of the student in question should also be briefed or even involved into discussion. The last step in the NetWave procedure covers mainly all tasks concerned with the monitoring of the implementation of the supporting measures initiated previously and their impact on the student's psychosocial crisis. For this purpose, the crisis prevention team has appointed a process observer. The process observer is required to regularly monitor the further process and the implementation of the supporting measures in direct contact with both the student and his or her parents. At the same time, the process observer is also required to reassess the successes and failures of the implementation of the supporting measures based on the procedures as outlined in Step 2, and report all relevant information back to the crisis prevention focal point and the crisis prevention team, normally after 4 to 12 weeks. The complete process would finish only once it has been determined the crisis has been curbed or stopped. In the meantime, all actors involved might switch back and forth between the aforementioned steps and repeat the respective procedures. Now, please think of your own school educational institution and try to answer the following self-assessment questions. In case you do not work directly in the educational sector, please think of a school or an educational institution which you know well and try to answer the questions in relation to that institution. The questions we would like you to think about are: how does the prevention architecture at your school or educational institution look like? What works well? What is missing? What stipulations and guidelines for prevention work exist for a school or educational institution in terms of legislation, school authorities' directives, intra-school instructions, emergency protocols, or crisis plans? What are the bodies that are responsible to carry out those provisions? Who are potential network partners? With whom did you work already? Who else could be helpful to support your work? With whom did you work already, or who else could be helpful to support your work? You could also draw a map of your potential and actual network partners. Now, if you consider integrating a similar prevention structure into your educational institutions, there are several aspects you should bear in mind. Always think of already existing structures to manage emergencies, such as cases of severe targeted school violence or the like. They might already exist, for instance, a crisis prevention or crisis intervention focal point, or a crisis prevention or crisis intervention team in your workplace. Try to adjust and integrate the new prevention structures into already existing positions, offices, and procedures. In any case, try to avoid creating double or triple structures. It is also important to keep existing legislation in mind. Schools are not allowed to take over all types of preventative interventions. In Germany, for example, schools are obliged to immediately inform security authorities if there's reasonable suspicion or evidence someone might commit a violent offense. Not least, try to build a trusting and sustainable network with external partners with specialist knowledge about radicalization, psychosocial assistance, or violence prevention, such as charities, civil society organizations, or non-governmental organizations, youth welfare offices, community police, psychologists, religious communities and institutions, the school administration system, artistic associations, sports clubs, social associations, any kind of projects and advice centers or parent representations. This will help you manage radicalization cases considerably in the future. And of course, if you have any more questions about NetWave or want to learn more about the program's details and how it performs risk and needs assessment on specific cases, you are very welcome to get in touch with my colleagues and myself at Berlin Free University. Before I come to an end, I'd like to introduce you to a little homework we have prepared for this module. The task we want you to work on is a case assessment task, and the case we want you to assess is the radicalization process of Mehmet A. Mehmet is a 9th grade student in the Friedrichshain district located in the city of Berlin. So on the following slides you're going to find several interviews and some background information on Mehmet's case. So I'd like you to read the information carefully and then try to assess Mehmet's case, addressing the procedural steps of case assessment we have looked into in the previous sections. On the slide, you'll find some guiding issues and questions you'd like you to answer and take into consideration when working on the case. So good luck and looking forward to hearing your impressions in the webinar. So thank you very much for listening, watching and participating, and all the best also on behalf of my colleagues from the Developmental Psychology Department at Berlin Free University. And first and foremost, stay healthy.